Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine a secret so tightly kept that it literally altered the course of human history. We're talking about the end of World War II, when the United States made a highly classified and deeply, deeply controversial decision. They secretly recruited scientists from Nazi Germany. And we're not just talking about ordinary run-of-the-mill researchers here. These were elite experts who had actively built technology for Adolf Hitler's regime. In this explainer,
This brings us straight to the central ethical dilemma we'll be exploring today. Was this a harsh but necessary decision to protect the nation, or did it totally compromise justice just for the sake of global power? I want you to keep this moral tension in the back of your mind as we trace exactly how this extraordinary and incredibly controversial.
Section 1. The Secret America Hid, the Post-WW2 Vacuum. It's May 1945, and the war in Europe has finally come to an end. Nazi Germany has surrendered, leaving its cities in absolute ruins, and a tragic, devastating human toll in its wake. The whole world was just desperate for peace. But behind closed doors, a brand new rivalry was already brewing between the United States and the Soviet Union. They were rapidly turning into fierce competitors for global influence, military tech, and scientific knowledge. And this sparked an immediate unseen battle. Who gets Germany's advanced scientists? You see, American intelligence realized incredibly quickly that Germany possessed some of the most brilliant engineers and researchers on the planet. These were the minds behind revolutionary rockets, jet aircraft, and military tech that was, quite frankly, miles ahead of its time. The urgent driving fear for the US was simple.
So the crucial point is, the US response to this fear was Operation Paperclip. It was a highly classified mission to locate and recruit top German scientists and bring them to America. But here's the part that makes this so heavily debated to this day. When officials reviewed these scientists' files, in some cases, personal histories were actively altered or minimized to hide their Nazi ties. Why? Simply to make recruitment easier and bypass immigration restrictions. The primary goal was to secure these minds for America and use their knowledge to.
Section 2. The Man Behind the Rockets. Wernher von Braun. All the paperclip recruits, Wernher von Braun is arguably the absolute standout figure. As a young engineer, the guy's dream was always just to send rockets into space. But during World War II, that raw talent was completely co-opted by the Nazi regime for military purposes. And this brilliantly illustrates an incredible paradox. On one hand, you have the V-2 rocket. Von Braun was the driving force behind this, the world's very first long-range guided ballistic missile. Technologically, it was a remarkable achievement, but in reality, it was a devastating weapon that caused massive civilian casualties and widespread destruction across Europe. But then, decades later, you have the Saturn V rocket.
But how in the world did he get from building weapons of terror to sending humanity to the moon? Let's walk through the strategic steps his team took back in 1945. First, von Braun and his top engineers realized Germany was definitely losing the war. Second, they made a calculated decision that their best chance for survival was to surrender specifically to US forces rather than risk capture by the Soviets. And third, the US military made a calculated decision of their own. Seeing these men as highly valuable strategic assets rather than strictly former enemies, they arranged for their secret transport to American military facilities. Dozens of engineers just.
3. The Cold War Space Race. From weapons to the moon. Let's move to and see how this builds across the timeline. With these scientists now secretly established on American soil, their mission fundamentally shifted. They weren't building weapons for Nazi Germany anymore. They were assigned to military research centers, working on advanced American missile defenses. They were prepping for a brand new era of technological competition with the Soviet Union. So WWI ends in 45, and this covert research begins. But the real catalyst, the spark that lights the fire, happens right in the middle in 1957. That's when the Soviet Union completely shocked the globe by launching Sputnik 1, the very first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. This instantly triggered the space race. The United States panicked and realized they had to urgently accelerate their own space program. And to do that, they leaned heavily on this pivot. Completely fundamentally changed their purpose. As the quote puts it, rockets were no longer seen only as weapons, they also became the key to exploring outer space. The exact same technology that was designed for pure destruction during the Second World War was basically repurposed for exploration. What started out as a highly classified effort to just build better missiles for the Cold War evolved into the push for what is Section 4, the enduring moral dilemma, weighing science against ethics. Now, we absolutely cannot look at these scientific triumphs without also looking at the cost.
This program remains one of the most fiercely debated topics in modern history. Historians are still digging through government records, personal documents, and wartime evidence, trying to unpack the immense complexities of the decisions made back then. When you look at the arguments, supporters argue that the operation successfully prevented the Soviet Union from gaining a dangerous, potentially world-ending technological advantage. They point out that it undeniably strengthened U.S. national security and massively accelerated the space program. But critics, they argue that it was simply morally unacceptable to recruit individuals who had actively served the Nazi regime, no matter the benefit to the U.S. They emphasize that the program actively ignored these scientists' direct connections to projects that relied on brutal forced labor, and by doing so completely compromised justice and accountability. Both sides present.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it captures a legacy that stretches into almost every aspect of our modern world. Operation Paperclip heavily influenced modern aerospace engineering. It pushed the boundaries of advanced missile technology, and it literally shaped the history of space exploration. It was a foundational component of the entire technological competition that defined the second half of the 20th century. But it also left us with deep, unresolved ethical questions. It's a stark reminder that history is rarely, if ever, simple. Sometimes the greatest scientific...
Which leaves us with a genuinely profound question. Could extraordinary scientific success ever truly erase the moral controversies of the people who made it possible? It's a heavy question, and it's one without an easy answer. But understanding the true, unvarnished history of Operation Paperclip helps us grapple with those difficult gray areas. The documents might have been stamped secret at the time, but history always eventually reveals the truth. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer picture of this secret science behind the space race.